Thank you so much, Dr. Haas. It is a joy and an honor to be with you all tonight. It's a real homecoming for me. I grew up on Long Island, New York, and even though I've spent the last 24 years in Austria, it's always a joy to come back to the Northeast and Philadelphia as well. So thank you so much for having us. Yeah, so the International Theological Institute is a special place. It's hard to pin down because we're doing so many different things, so many good things, if I may say. But yeah, we were founded by John Paul II in 1996. We're a pontifical institute. We were founded for theology, and that is our primary task. We were founded to unite the Eastern theology and Western theology, so we study not only the Roman tradition, but also the Byzantine tradition. Not only do we study that, but we live it, and we have the spiritual life, the liturgical life, is something that we have. So we're really breathing with both lungs. Such a rich Catholic life, very universal, East and West. Our uniqueness is not only studying the great books, but really sitting at their feet. We study the great saints and doctors of the church, and we really allow them to form us. I tell all of our students that our class time, or where you're learning time, where you're being taught, is when you're reading St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. John Paul II. And so we're being formed by these great doctors and masters of the Catholic tradition. And then we come to class and we talk about them together. It's very dynamic and very active. We have used the Socratic discussion method. And so you have an opportunity to really make the truth your own. And that's so important to us because the formation of our heart, of your hearts, of our students' hearts, are our main goal. We also have a program in marriage and family. John Paul II, as we know, was the main theme of his pontificate. And we fostered that. And we study, again, the tradition, and of course John Paul II, and the Church's magisterium on the marriage and family topics. We also have a liberal arts program. We started a few years ago, which has become very popular. We are really the only Catholic liberal arts school in Europe, which is shocking, right? In light of the Greco-Roman traditions of Catholic liberal education. So we're trying to bring, just like this institute here is trying to re-evangelize and to regain the culture, the Christian culture. That is definitely a goal at ITI as well. And we do it on our knees. We're a very profound spiritual and liturgical life, sacramental life, as well as, of course, in the classroom, studying hard. And then, which is also unique for Europe, not unique here, but we do have an American-style campus where we live together and practice loving one another. So you put that all together, and it is quite a profound experience. And we humbly and with great joy in our hearts do it. So we're so thankful to be here and tell you about it. So tonight's topic is Jesus' cruciform love in the Gospel of John, laying down one's life for the common good. The church is so good to us, right? It gives us this great time of Lent to really dwell upon Jesus' death. Now, what I want to do tonight is to dwell upon that, but also dwell upon the main reason why Jesus died, namely out of love for us. So I think that's really fitting for Lent, to really not only focus on his death, but also mainly on his love. So we're going to pinpoint, what does Jesus love, and what does he want us to love, and how does he want us to love it? Now, I've been told recently that the best lectures is one that has a great beginning and a memorial end, but doesn't have much in between. So I will try to keep this short so that you're all with me. And I just want to remind you of our tasks that we all have to do. My job, of course, is to speak, and your job is to listen. Now, the challenge here is that I finish my job first before you finish yours. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, well, I think the first place to start in trying to understand Jesus' love in relation to his death, is John 12. And in John 12, the reason for that is because the fulfillment of Jesus' mission is beginning. Jesus tells us this himself. He says in John 12:23 that the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And one thing that's interesting about this passage is that it's not a private remark. He doesn't declare this privately with his disciples. It's actually public. And that's really important for our discussion tonight. Just earlier in John 12, it's stated in John 12:9 that the great crowds of Jews came to Jesus. A few verses later in 12:11, it's stated that, Philip tells Jesus that many Greeks want to see him. So the Jews are coming to him, the Greeks are coming to him, and then the Pharisees in 12:19 state, the whole world has gone after him. And then Jesus states, yes, yet again, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. So I'm wondering, what's the connection between Jesus' mission, him now being glorified, and all the Jews and the Greeks coming to him? Well, the next verse in John 12:24 gives us a hint. Jesus gives us a parable to explain that his hour has now come. The parable we all know, truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So I'm wondering, what does this parable mean, and how does it address our question about Jesus' mission and the whole world coming to him? Now, I think at the core, this parable is contrasting two opposite ways of life for a grain of wheat. Right? A grain of wheat can either hold on to its life, to its own individual life, or it can fall to the earth and die. Now, what is at stake in these two ways of life? I think on the one hand, Jesus is stating that if it does not die, if it remains alive, then it remains alone, which I think refers to it abiding by itself, solely for its own good, the own good of its life. And it doesn't possess, therefore, a relationship with the other grains of wheat, as it were. On the other hand, Jesus relates that if the grain of wheat does fall to the earth and die, then it bears much fruit, which I think that refers to reproducing many more grains of wheat. Right? The grain of wheat that dies is, you might say, opening itself to the abundant good of life shared by all grains of wheat. In other words, it seems to be ordering the private good of its own life to the common good of the life of the species. Right? And of course, it's an either-or situation. It's the only way for the good of the species to be fostered. So much for the primer on grain reproduction. John 12:25 now seems to qualify this parable, because we're still wondering, right? The parable doesn't seem to really answer what's the connection between Jesus' hour that's come now, hour to die, and all the Greeks and Jews coming to him. So in 12:25 now, Jesus states that he who loves his life loses it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Now, Jesus seems to be qualifying this grain of wheat parable in two ways. So first, he specifies two different kinds of goods to which it corresponds, namely one's life in this world and eternal life. Secondly, he elevates the parable to the level of personal love. So now he's dealing with persons. Let's talk about the first qualification. So first, Jesus contrasts a person's life in this world and eternal life. And the gospel is really clear about the person's life in this world. It says several times that the life in the world can perish. I'll give you an example. John 3:16 states, whoever believes in him should not perish, implied there, of course, that he who does not believe will perish. Of course, human life is something that could perish. It's very similar to, Jesus talks about food which perishes. And it's very similar to that. So therefore, the term perish manifests that similar acquisitions can be ruined, they can be lost, they could be destroyed, especially when they're shared with other people, right? Moreover, even when a perishable good, such as the bread, for instance, what Jesus multiplies to the 5,000, that bread can be shared with many different people, but once it becomes the possession of one of the many, then of course it only profits that one person. So this good is a highly limited one, isn't it? And because it's limited, it seems to be a cause for competition and antagonism regarding the one, who will possess more of it, and this person or that person. Antagonism comes to the fore. And then lastly, this kind of perishable good seems to be a superficial one. Right? It's possessed superficially. And therefore, with all this in mind, it's difficult for a community to be established around this kind of perishable good. Now let's talk about eternal life on the other hand. Right? It's contrasted. The gospel contrasts eternal life with the human life that perishes. In John 10:28, Jesus says, I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. So eternal life seems to be a good that not only perishes because of what it is. According to John 17:3, eternal life is the knowledge of the one true God and Jesus Christ, whom the true God sent. Couple that with John 4, verse 24, affirms that the one God is spirit. All right, and therefore is wholly and permanently himself. He is the one whole that is impossible to segregate into parts, to diminish in any way, or to destroy even when simultaneously shared by the multitude. Right? He is able, as John 6:44 states, he's able to draw many to himself. Therefore, it's not surprising that Jesus frequently proclaims that the Father is greater than all, and must therefore be a good for many that surpasses every other. Moreover, this benefit is the most interior one that can be possessed with one's innermost being, and unites those who share in it interiorly. And Jesus says this much in 14:20. He says, you know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. Therefore, more than any other good, eternal life with the Father and the Son possesses the greatest power to constitute a community. Because this grain is shared in a unique, remarkable manner, no competition will arise between those who come to him and possess him. Different from a good that can perish, no one ought to claim God solely for their own. He belongs to every believer contemporaneously. So instead of competition over ownership of a perishable return, a deeply intimate society of friendship is established. It is for this reason that Jesus can say, in my Father's house there are many rooms for all the Jews and all the Greeks. Now John 12:25 qualifies the grain of wheat parable in a second way. Not only do the terms love and hate raise the parable to the level of human persons, but they also suggest opposite poles within a shared spectrum of love. The gospel suggests that love and hate ought to be understood in the terms of degrees of love. Loving something more or less, and within a certain order. For instance, when Jesus asks Peter, do you love me more than these, referring to his disciples, he's inquiring as to the degree of love Peter has for him, as to where he falls within the spectrum of Peter's love. And if Peter loves him in the first place, before his love for his fellow disciples. Or when Jesus says that greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Here too, he's working with the reality that there are gradations of love and hate. And a good may be loved in a manner above and beyond all else. Another example, that when Jesus and the Father are hated, seems to be rooted in the interests their detractors love more. John 3 says, men loved darkness rather than light. And John 12, they loved the glory of men more than the glory of God. Now furthermore, love and hate in John 12:25 indicate an opposition between two goods, to which they are respectively related. Namely, again, the singular good of a person's life in this world, and the common good of eternal life. Now, since, as the gospel relates, perishable commodities cannot be shared in common with others, at least in a full manner, they stand in contradiction, opposition, and in competition with universal goods. Consequently, when a person loves the private goods of his individual life more than the eternal life, he can be said to hate the latter which opposes his greater love. Therefore, he forfeits his share in eternal life and gains only the desire of his first love, which is, as we've seen, a perishable good, a commodity that can be lost. He who hates his life, he who loves his life will lose it. In the words of the parable, he remains alone. Now, on the contrary, the conflict and competition between the exclusive assets of one's own life and the advantage of the many are removed when one recognizes, like the grain of wheat that dies, that the flourishing of the common good requires a person to love it more than one singular good, by offering it in the spirit of sacrifice to the service of what is common. It is the only way for the good of the multitude to flourish. He therefore can be said to hate his life in this world because his first love is eternal life. He who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. According to the parable, he bears much fruit. So let's pull this together. In the light of the qualifications Jesus makes in 12:25, how does the parable of the grain of wheat apply to Jesus, the Jews and the Greeks, and his mission? Similar to the grain of wheat, Jesus is confronted with two contrary ways of life, ordered to two different goods. He can choose to remain alive, hold on to his life in this world, and subsequently remain alone, or he can choose to die, hate his life in this world, and consequently bear much fruit for the Jews and the Gentiles. Now, there's no doubt as to what he chooses. Only a few verses later, after the grain of wheat parable, Jesus clearly exclaims in John 12:32 and 33, "When I am lifted up out of the earth, I will draw all to myself." Then the evangelist adds, "He said this to show what death he was to die." So as the grain of wheat that falls into the earth and dies and then produces much fruit from out of the earth, so Jesus will die, be lifted up out of the earth, and then will draw all to himself. Jesus' main concern is the good of all. He's placing their participation in his very life with the Father, which is eternal life, above and beyond his own private good. He is therefore utterly opposed to closing himself off from the world. He clearly rejects life of isolation, where he exists solely for the interests of his own individual life. He in no way desires to remain alive, so to remain alone, like the grain of wheat which does not die. Rather, Jesus' first love is the common good for which he is willing to die. He possesses a cruciform love for the good of all. Now, this conclusion is supported in the very next verse, John 12:26, where seemingly in an arbitrary manner, Jesus exhorts his follower to be a servant who serves him. Its connection is clear, however, if Jesus desires his followers to imitate his own service of the common good of the Jews and Gentiles. With the love of the servant, they too must place their exclusive goods of their life at the service of the benefit of all. Now, our reading is in agreement with St. Thomas Aquinas, who comments on this verse, 12:26. He says, "Those serve Christ who seek the things of Christ, but those who seek their own advantage are not servants of Christ, but servants of themselves. They seek after their own interests, though not of those of Jesus Christ." This reading of the grain of wheat parable corresponds very well with what Jesus says elsewhere about the essence of his mission and the means needed to accomplish it. For instance, in John 10, Jesus presents himself as the good shepherd who is gathering all those who hear his voice into one flock. His main goal is to form a community of his followers in the deepest, most interior and enduring manner possible. Hence, he constitutes them around himself, the one shepherd, who himself is a good that can be shared by the entire flock at once, but is never reduced in any way. They can share in his life because, as Jesus says, he will make it available by laying it down out of love for his sheep. Furthermore, the same common good and cruciform love are disclosed by the evangelist's comments in chapter 11, verse 51 through 52, where he states that Jesus will die for the sake of gathering into one both the nation of Israel and the children of God who are scattered abroad. Lastly, the universal good of unity in his eternal life with the Father is the essential content of Jesus' intimate prayer and powerful prayer for his disciples in the Last Supper in John 17. He says, "Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, so that the Son may glorify you. Since you have given authority over all people to give eternal life to all whom you have given him, the glory which you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one as we are one." Now, if there's any doubt that the very purpose of Jesus' mission, the precise aim of him laying down his life, is to serve first and foremost the common good of the Jews and the Greeks, then one only needs to consider what he says in John 16:7. He says, "Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is better for you that I go away." The Greek word that is translated better is sumphero, which can refer to that which brings together or which is profitable or helpful. That the term is translated in the Bible as common good is not surprising, since it is a good which possesses that surpassing power to communicate itself to its adherents and subsequently to constitute them as a community. So therefore, in addressing his disciples, "It is better for you that I go away." And note, by the way, in 16:7, the "you" is in the second person plural form. Jesus is referring to their common good, which is truly better, more advantageous for them than other goods. Sumphero is employed 2 other times in the gospel, and it possesses the same meaning. John 11, verse 50 and 18:14 refer to Caiaphas' prophecy. Quote, "It is better for you that one man should die for the nation, and that the whole nation should not perish." End quote. Similar to John 16:7, Jesus' mission is essentially related to the good of the whole. The sacrifice of his life serves the existence and unity of the whole nation. Now, the conclusions reached regarding the grain of wheat parable and how it articulates the main purpose of Jesus' mission are confirmed and strengthened by his address to his disciples at the Last Supper. In John 15, Jesus again speaks about the goal of bearing much fruit. In the first 8 verses alone, it's referred to 6 times. In fact, it appears to be the very reason why Jesus chose his disciples and appointed them, as John 15:16 relates. He says, "You should go and bear fruit, and your fruit should abide." Moreover, the Father is glorified precisely by the disciples bearing much fruit, as 15:8 relates. So what does it mean that they ought to bear much fruit? And that it ought to abide in John 15? Well, according to John 15:1 through 17, the goal of bearing much fruit is achieved by the means of abiding in Jesus' love and commandments. His commandments are summed up in one command: that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love than no man has than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. There are several things worth noting about this commandment. The first thing, the commandment to love appears to be an oxymoron, since on one level it is as useless as commanding a person to know with his mind, since both knowing and loving are simply something human beings do, regardless if they're commanded or not. Jesus' command, then, is not simply to love without any qualification. He is not commanding that they love a good whatsoever in any way whatsoever. Rather, he is commanding them to love a specific good in a certain manner. So which good is Jesus commanding that they love? And in which manner should they love it? It is important to note that Jesus is not merely addressing a particular individual here, but he is chiefly addressing the entire group, which is expressed again in the second person plural form of you all. Moreover, he's requiring all of them to love the good of the entire community. You all love one another. In other words, the benefit of Jesus' many friends, which he goes on to talk about in the next verse, 15:13. Again, note the plural form of the word friends here. The benefit of the many friends is to be the main object of their love. Furthermore, the good willed in love to one another is no ordinary benefit, such as a perishable piece of fruit. Rather, as 15 verse 9 and 10 relates, the good of this society of friends is Jesus himself, to abide with him and in the eternal life he shares with the Father. He's an abiding good, which can simultaneously be shared by all of his friends and yet is never depleted. Lastly, this account helps to make sense that this kind of good is a commandment. Commandments are promulgated with the goal of promoting the advantage of an entire community. Think about, for example, commandments ordered to the flourishing of justice or of peace. This helps us understand Jesus' words in John 12:50. The Father's commandment is eternal life. The second thing that's interesting about this commandment to love, just as Jesus is not commanding love of any good whatsoever, but rather a specific good, a common good, so the manner in which this specific kind of good is to be loved is also qualified by him. How does Jesus think a disciple ought to love the good of all? He commands that it be loved in a greater degree. Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Jesus is teaching that a disciple ought to love the good of the community in the first place and in the foremost manner. Partiality for the advantage of the community of friends ought to be the prime consideration. He's revealing that love has its reason for being, its momentum and dynamism, and commanded requirements from the community rather than from the individual. This is what bearing much fruit means in John 15, verses 1 through 17. Contrast this with the reason why a branch cannot bear fruit. Jesus says, a branch cannot bear fruit by itself. It cannot bear fruit because of its preoccupation with itself and its own interests. However, a branch bears fruit when Jesus says it is pruned, because it is offering some gain that it alone possesses for the profit of the whole vine and branches, since its love for them takes precedence over its love for any private good. Jesus himself was commanded by the Father to love the good of his friends with a greater love by laying down his life for them. John 15, verse 9 relates that Jesus' cruciform love is analogous to the manner in which the Father loves in general. What are the specific characteristics of the Father's love? According to John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. The Father's love is directed primarily to the good of the whole world, that it may possess eternal life. No wonder Jesus says in John 15:10 that he's abiding in the Father's love by keeping his commandment to lay down for his life for all, since the Father himself loves the advantage of all in the foremost manner. Now, are we concluding that private goods are evil? They should not be possessed? Should they be avoided at all costs? By no means. Such assets are truly good, ought to be owned, and are needed to maintain one's life and well-being. Jesus himself, he eats food, Right? He possesses his own clothing. He seeks a place to dwell securely. He has concern for money and values his own time and space. Because individual commodities are beneficial, Jesus multiplies them. He affirms their goodness and necessity in his first miracle at Cana by transforming water into an abundance of wine, and later in the miracle of the multiplication of loaves and fish. The point Jesus is stressing is that although exclusive possessions such as food, clothing, a home, money, and one's time are all genuine benefits, they are not the greatest goods and therefore should not be pursued in the primary place. This is what it means to hate one's life in this world. Put differently, a person ought to love his life, however, with a lesser love. A good example of this is in John 6, where Jesus encourages his hearers not to work for food which perishes. He does not so because it is evil or unnecessary, but rather because its goodness is significantly less when compared to food which abides for eternal life. St. Augustine's words are really fitting here. He says that charity, about which it is written, does not seek its own. Is understood in this way: it places the common before the private, not the private before the common. Now, unfortunately, living according to this order, this hierarchy of goods, is a significant challenge for all of us, isn't it? And it's a significant challenge for the characters in the gospel as well. Take Peter, for example, in light of his denial of Jesus. So the disorder of loving a lesser private good more than a greater common good is rooted in a popular and prevalent falsehood, wherein the private good is considered to be more worthy of love. In fact, many characters in the gospel think that Jesus himself is acting for his own good. For example, his apparently heterodox actions on the Sabbath seem not to heed Isaiah's warning, neither to, quote, seek your own pleasure on my holy day, end quote, nor to, quote, go your own way on the Sabbath. However, Jesus states with great frequency and force that he never seeks his own interests and advantages. I could give you a plethora of texts here, but I'll give you one, the most powerful. In John 5, verse 30 states, I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. So contrary to Jesus, however, the devil is he who does in fact, quote, speak out of his own, from John 8:44. He acts out of his own as a supposed source of all things, and completely for his own good, as his works testify. According to Jesus, he is a murderer from the beginning, and a liar and a father of lies. He orients his life primarily around his own interests and advantages. They are his first love. Even with the devil, it is the question of love. In light of being a murderer and a liar, the words that Jesus speaks elsewhere about other people can apply to him. He does not have the love of God in him, from John 5. Since this is a quote from John 3, loved darkness rather than light because his deeds were evil. Because of his preferential love for himself, he is similar to the grain of wheat who does not die and subsequently remains alone. He is more akin to the branch that attempts to bear fruit by itself. He is not clearly interested in ordering his life to the communal good. He is not its servant. Therefore, as Jesus explicitly says in John 8:44, it is not surprising that the devil does not stand in the common good of truth. Therefore, those who love private acquisitions more than the public good are living in falsehood and in accordance with a diabolical love rather than a cruciform love. Such a diabolical love is the root cause of division schisma, such a prevalent and important, significant topic in the Gospel of John. And this is illustrated in the thieves and robbers in Jesus' parable of the Good Shepherd, who quote, come only to steal and to kill and destroy, end quote. They are similar, as Jesus relates in John 10, verse 12, to a hired hand who sees a wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf catches and scatters them, end quote. The main reason why the hired hand does not lay down his life for the sheep is, as Jesus states in John 10, verse 13, because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. His first care is the money he earns, his payment, which is the quintessential private good. Because of his greater diabolical love, he dismisses the very life and unity of the sheepfold, which are goods common to all the sheep. The result is competition, division, and finally destruction. What a stark contrast to the cruciform love of the one shepherd who lays down his life for his scattered sheep, so that they may have life and have it more abundantly, and be gathered into one flock and may possess eternal life. Jesus knows that persons similar to the thief, murderer, and hired hand, again, do not have the love of God within them. Why not? Because, as John 12:43 states, they loved the glory of men more than the glory of God. This is the root reason for the cause of division, disunity, and ultimately death. It is not surprising then that Judas, who according to John 12, verse 6, did not, quote, care for the poor because he was a thief. It's not surprising that he is the cause of division among the community of Jesus' friends. And of course, ultimately, Jesus' death. Now, it is precisely this widespread falsehood that Jesus is seeking to overcome. Therefore, Jesus is very clear that laying down one's life out of greater love for the common good is a matter of necessity. First, according to John 15, it is a commandment, and therefore is not an option or a suggestion. Secondly, in John 12:24, Jesus states that unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it bears much fruit. As it is for the grain of wheat, so it is for Jesus' followers. Thirdly, according to John 15:8, only those followers who bear much fruit by loving the common good in the first place are truly his disciples. Ultimately, as Jesus warns in John 5, those who have done the good will be judged to the resurrection of life. However, what does differ, what may differ, is the manner in which one loves it, since it may take many different forms based on varying capacities and circumstances. For instance, some are called to lay down their life in the form of martyrdom, some through the vow of poverty, and some through a continual and regular sacrificial ordering of one's exclusive possessions for the service and flourishing of the communal good. St. John Chrysostom, a great saint beloved at the ITI, among several other church fathers, upholds the necessity of loving the common good in the foremost manner. Listen to this, extraordinary statements. He says, "It is not possible for a person to be saved who has not looked to the common good." Elsewhere he writes, "Since they showed zeal and did all things for the common good, they reached heaven. For nothing is as pleasing to God as living for the common good." Again he states, "This is the rule of the most perfect Christianity, the point that stands highest of all, namely, seeking those things which are the common good. For nothing can make a man an imitator of Christ as caring for his neighbors." Extraordinary statements. Now another point needs to be raised, and this is very important. One critical objection to Jesus' teaching concerning the good of all is that it appears to be a benefit for everyone except the one serving it. Take, for the example, the grain of wheat that falls to the earth and dies. The individual grain sacrifices its life for the advantage of its species and appears not to gain at all from it. The same could be said of the branch that is pruned. The good of the vine and the branches as a whole seems to be alien, even antagonistic, to the individual branch. At the personal level, does discipleship consist merely in self-abasement for the sake of the whole, where such apparently sub-personal requests, such as hate one's life, are demanded? Is the benefit of the individual person eclipsed by the advantage of all? On the surface, it appears that a disciple is more like a slave than a friend. However, a closer look at the gospel reveals that when Jesus demands and commands his disciples to love the common good in the first place, he does so with their personal good in mind, as he states in John 15:11, "These things I've spoken to you, so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full." The joy of each and every disciple will be full precisely because each will possess the communal good which they love. Each individual is a personal beneficiary of it. This makes sense, since a disciple is part of the community whose welfare he serves, and therefore he in turn will also participate in the benefits universally shared by the community. Assumed in Jesus' statement is that a common good is not an alien good that is incompatible or opposed to the good of an individual believer. It is not a foreign benefit in competition with one's personal advantage. Rather, it is a personal good of each member of the community, uniting each person and ensuring each individual's true benefit. Hence, there is no tension between the singular grain of wheat and the species, between the individual and the community, between self-concern and personal fulfillment. As Jesus teaches in John 4, verse 36, he who reaps receives wages and gathers fruit for eternal life, so that sower and reaper may rejoice together. The relationship between the glory of God and the love of the common good indicates the same point. Note that Jesus' teaching on the love of the common good via the parable of the grain of wheat and his commandment to love are given within the context of the glorification of the Son of Man, like I referred to before. Now, glory is the visible manifestation of the profound goodness of something for the sake of it to be acknowledged, honored, and praised. It is the hour of the glory of the Son of Man, because by laying down his life for the restoration of Israel and the ingathering of the Gentiles, Jesus' profound loving goodness is now being visibly manifest to all, so that all may recognize it, honor it, and imitate it. In doing so, each and every disciple will personally share in the very goodness of God that is being glorified. Jesus states that every respective disciple who serves this glorious common good through a kind of humbling self-effacement, as he himself serves it, will not only be glorifying the Father, that's what John 15:11 says, bearing much fruit will glorify the Father, but also will be, quote, honored by my Father. From John 12:26. Not only are we honoring and glorifying God, but in doing so we're participating in the great glorious goodness of God, so that we ourselves are honored by the Father. This participation and therefore transformation in the glorious goodness of this eternal life of the Father is ultimately is the main goal of Jesus' prayer to his Father in John 17, verse 22 through 26. It says, Jesus says, the glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. And the word completely one there could also mean be perfected into one. So this continual entering into the glory of God, sharing into the glory of God by loving the common good is a process by which one is perfected. Number one. Number two, so that the world may know you. Right? So Jesus is interested in the world, the whole world, the good of all. And we can now participate in fulfilling his mission. Now, radical participation in a common good, therefore, is truly better for you, like we've seen. It ought to be clear that such common good thinking is not altruism, but rather possesses a reward-based logic. By sacrificing something of a lesser significance, one is gaining something of greater significance. Because of its greater communicative and constitutive power, an indivisible common good is able to be drawn deeply into a disciple's mind and heart, and consequently is possessed in a deeper, more interior manner than a private good. Therefore, as Jesus makes evident throughout John 12 and John 15, the love of one's personal good paradoxically depends primarily on his love for the common good. The disciple's personal advantage cannot be fulfilled apart from loving the benefit of the community in which he is a part. As a member of the group of friends, he himself partakes in that which he sacrificially pursues. One receives by giving. Nor is Jesus promoting egoism, where a person, knowing that it is more profitable for himself, appropriates the common good first and foremost to himself as a benefit for him alone. Such egoism appears to be motivating Caiaphas, the high priest. In John 11, Caiaphas reports that he is interested in the good of the people and the whole nation. He says, "It is better for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation should not perish." However, it is apparent that he is pursuing a common good, the existence and the unity of the people of Israel, not as an advantage for all, but merely as a gain for some. Although Jesus is part of the Jewish nation, along with Lazarus, Caiaphas and his cohort seek unjustly to kill them. For the communal good to be possessed according to its nature, it has to be pursued precisely as a good for all. In fact, the telltale sign of a genuine common good is that it's truly common. It must be an advantage for each and every member of the community. Therefore, the good that Caiaphas is seeking is a private one rather than a common one. His greater love for private interests and advantages has displaced, therefore, universal ones and has deprived him of them. This displacement of the common by the private is expressed poignantly by St. Augustine. He says, they love their view not because it is true, but because it is theirs. Otherwise, they could equally love another true view, as I love what they say when what they say is true, not because it is theirs, but because it is true, and therefore not theirs, but true. And if they love a view because it is true, it is already both theirs and mine, since it belongs in common to all lovers of the truth. And therefore, O Lord, your judgments should be feared, because your truth is neither mine, nor his, nor anyone else's, but it belongs to all of us, whom you publicly call to its communion, warning us terribly not to have it in private, so as not to be deprived of it. For anyone who claims as proper to himself what you have given to all to enjoy, and wants to be his own, what belongs to all, is driven away from what is common to his own. That is, from truth to a lie. For the one who speaks the lie speaks out of his own. Very similar phrase as Jesus says about the devil. Therefore, Jesus teaches that each particular disciple who hates his life in this world for the good of the many will actually, in the end, keep it. He will keep it his own distinctive life for eternal life. Again, St. John Chrysostom expresses exactly this kind of interweaving of the good of all and the good of the individual. He says, by acting in everything for the common good, not merely seeking our own, a man really seeks his own good when he looks to that of one's neighbor. What is their good is ours. And elsewhere he says, seek not therefore your own, that you may find your own. For he that seeks his own finds not his own. To conclude, how can we concretely live according to Jesus' teaching regarding the common good? We need to perform 3 actions. First, Jesus' teaching that we must seek an authentic common good consciously together with others. One main purpose of his parable of the grain of wheat and his commandment to love is to clearly reveal the precise good which constitutes his disciples as his community. This is the vital starting point for any group, for a family, a church, a city, a state, a university, a business, that each and every member acknowledge and are aware of the common good to which they all are aimed. As a leader of the restored Israel and gathered Gentiles, Jesus, the one shepherd, is fully aware that his task is to reveal this good to them, to explain its benefits and why it is worth seeking. Such an explanation is the source for motivation in remaining in the community and for working for its flourishing. Secondly, we need to subordinate ourselves to the common good for the sake of others. And this is what this talk has been all about. As Jesus was the servant who laid down his life so that his disciples can share in the eternal life of the Father and the Son in unity and truth, so his disciples must do the same in the various groups in which they belong. So whether if one is seeking the good of spousal love and procreation and education of children in marriage, or of truth at a university, or justice in one's own town, or peace throughout the nation, or the good order within a business, or God himself within the church, such common goods unite each member internally, generate a common attitude towards the community as a whole, and therefore are the essential core around which any relationship can grow. Such goods define the community and foster communal meaning, purpose, loyalty, responsibility, and mission. Thirdly and lastly, subordinate yourself to others for the sake of the common good. Not only did Jesus desire that Peter love him more than his other disciples, but he also asked him to feed my sheep. Similar to Peter then, a husband and wife, a father and mother, bishops and laymen, teachers and students, governors and citizens, employers and employees must be ready to utilize their gifts and accept their given tasks within the community in which they belong, and subordinate themselves to one another for the good of the whole. Such subordination places each member on equal footing and takes away the possibility that one of them might be subordinated to the other in a disordered, dysfunctional manner. Here we have solidarity in loving one another. Thank you very much.